Hi everyone and welcome to this drawing video. I recently uploaded my Inktober sketchbook tour, and in that sketchbook I worked on a bunch of different drawings with forests in the background. As you can see here with this style of forest, and I'll flip back through so you can see there's lots of trees in this style. And a few of you recently asked me if I could work on a process video showing how I worked on the drawings like this with these trees in the background. And I thought this would be a really fun idea, and hopefully it helps out in some way. These drawings are so fun to work on, and they only take about 30 minutes to an hour to complete each one. So I'm going to work on a brand new drawing in this style with these trees in the background, and hopefully it helps out in some way. In terms of the equipment I use for drawings like this, I always start off with this Pigma Micron 05 to add all of the outlines. After that, to add the shading to these drawings, I use Copic markers Cool Grey 3, 5 and 7. And lastly, to add the highlights to these drawings, I use my Uni-Ball Signo Broad white ink pen. I absolutely love adding highlights to these drawings, especially with the tanned paper background. The highlights really stand out over the top of that. In terms of the paper itself, I use this sketchbook. This sketchbook is actually a Rowney Earthbound sketchbook. The paper is really nice tanned colour, and it has a very smooth surface, so it works perfectly well with markers. I've also found that it works perfectly well with Prismacolor pencils and that kind of thing as well. And yeah, so I'll start working on the drawing, and I really hope this video helps out in some way. So, in terms of the new drawing in this video, as you can see, I started off working on the initial sketch. I started by working on the foreground and just getting a layout of a stream running from the background towards the foreground, and just adding layers of land around that stream. And then I just quickly, really roughly sketched some outlines of some trees in the background. You can see how quick and simple these are to just quickly sketch, just adding some diagonal lines in each direction. And not worrying too much about any details at all, just getting the idea of the shape. After that, it was time to work on the pen outlines. For this, I used the Pigma Micron 05 and started off working on the outlines of the trees. Again, using very quick fine strokes, not letting the pen sit on the paper for too long, not thinking too much about the line work, and letting it be a bit more natural. I find that if I let the pen sit on the paper for too long and think about the lines too much, then the lines can look a lot more awkward and less natural. So just quick fine strokes in kind of a zigzag motion along the previous sketch that I'd laid down before. And after I'd added that first layer of trees, I decided to add another layer of trees in the more distant background, using some finer outlines to fill in the gaps between the trees I'd already added. And this was a nice way of making that forest look a little bit more dense. With the outlines of the forest completed, it was then time to work on the outlines of the foreground and that stream that's running through it. So I started by adding a very thick outline that separates the foreground and the forest in the background, and just proceeded to add layers of land around the stream. Not worrying too much at this stage. I'm going to use markers later on to show up some shaded areas in the land to add more depth to it. With all of the outlines completed, it was then time to work on the colouring, and for this, as I mentioned before, I used the Copic markers Cool Grey 3, 5 and 7. I started off by using the Cool Grey 7 to add a layer of shading to all of the trees, including the trees in the more distant background. And once I'd done that, I then used the Cool Grey 7 again to add a gradient going upwards from the lower part of the trees, just using quick strokes with the pen to add a gradient moving from the bottom of the trees upwards. After that, I used the Cool Grey 5 to continue that shading, and using a lighter grey was a way of kind of fading that gradient upwards towards the sky. And lastly, I used the Cool Grey 3 to fill in the rest of the sky and continue that gradient upwards, so there's no distinct lines between the shading, they've all kind of blended into each other. Starting off with the Cool Grey 7 and blending upwards into the Cool Grey 5, and lastly blending upwards into the Cool Grey 3 and filling in the rest of the sky. Next up, it was time to work on the first layer of highlighting. Using my Uni-Ball Signo Broad white ink pen, I filled in, I just basically covered all of the outlines of each tree, using that same quick fine strokes with that zigzag motion, and just outlining each tree, even the trees in the far background as well. After that, I started adding layers to each tree as well, just kind of using the same zigzag motion and just sort of building up layers. It almost makes it look like they are covered in snow. After adding those highlights, I left that ink to dry for a few minutes, and then went back to it again with the Cool Grey 7, starting to add some dark shading moving upwards from the bottom of the trees just to add another layer of shading. After that, I used the Cool Grey 5 to just smooth the gradient outwards and upwards towards the top of the trees. I really love the effects this gives. It makes it seem like these trees are snow covered and they're shaded towards the bottom, and then the tops of the trees are the most highlighted parts, highlighted by the moon and the stars that are in the sky, and I'll be adding them next. So to add all of the details to the sky, I started by sketching a circle right in the center, keeping it as centered as possible, and then I filled that circle in with the Uni-Ball highlighter pen. Afterwards, using that highlighter pen to add lots of little dots to the sky, just filling it with lots of stars. Moving on to the bottom half of this drawing with the foreground, I started by using the Cool Grey 3 to add a layer of shading to all of the land, making sure to leave the stream. And after I'd added that first layer of shading, I then used the Cool Grey 5 marker to add some darker shading, adding some more depth to the foreground by adding some darker shading towards the background, adding some darker shading where there are some bumps in the ground, and around the stream as well to show up that definition between the land and the highlighted stream. Lastly, as you know, I absolutely love adding highlights to these drawings, and I usually end up going over the top with them. So I started adding some highlights to the foreground, using a thick white highlight towards the top of the foreground to separate it from the dark trees. I also added some highlights along some of the bumps in the ground, and also used it to add some ripples to the stream by adding some fine highlighting around all of the outline of the stream, and added some lines across it to create that effect of the water flowing. And this is a really nice simple way of making it look like there's a stream running through. After that, this drawing was completed, and it's honestly such a fun drawing to work on, and it doesn't take long at all. I think this one took about 45 minutes in total, and I highly recommend trying it out if you have any tanned paper or if you have any grey board or anything like that. It works really well. Being able to add highlights over the top of the darker paper is a really fun thing to do, and I highly recommend trying it out. I really hope this video helps out in some way, and if you do work on anything similar, then feel free to show me on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram. If you enjoy videos like this and you want to learn more about how to draw, then feel free to subscribe to this channel. Any likes, shares, that kind of support is hugely appreciated. It really means a lot to me, and it does help the channel out a lot. If you want to follow my progress photos and keep up to date with everything I'm working on, then be sure to check out the links in the description box below to check out my Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And once again, thank you so much for the support on this channel. I had a huge amount of fun working on this drawing, and I really hope it helps out in some way. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you all soon.